Hickman here.
Dunstan here.
Willow here.
Gavich here.
Scafidi here.
Mikulski here. Corral here.
Seifert here.
Welcome, everybody. Happy New Year. Welcome to 2017. Just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to be chairing the meeting until about 6:20. Then I got to go do a quick Cub Scouts thing at Edgewood School. I'll hand it over to Councilmember Bekavich, and then I'll come back as soon as I can. Item 2 is minutes of the December 13th, 2016 meeting.
The Dickman makes a motion and we approve the minutes of the December 13th, 2016 meeting.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call.
Dickman, aye.
Dunstan aye.
Willow, aye.
Gavich abstains.
Scafidi, aye.
Mikulski aye. Corral aye.
Seifert aye.
Chandler, aye.
Item 3 is significant common council actions. Carrie.
Council approved the following: an ordinance amending another ordinance to extend Section 11 time of compliance to a deadline of May 31st, 2017 for the commencement of construction of Phase 1 on the property located at 1980 West Rawson Avenue. That's Oak Park Place. Also, a resolution approving a lease agreement between the South Suburban Chamber of Commerce and the City of Oak Creek, and an ordinance amending the comprehensive plan and planned land use map for the properties at 331 and 401 East Oak Street to reflect the change in land use from planned office to planned industrial. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Carrie. So on item 4 is old business. It was held from the December 13th, 2016 meeting. It's a signed appeal request for the property at 7978 South Main Street. Tenant address is 330 West Town Square Way. It was submitted by Christine Haas. Gigi's Cupcakes that would allow opaque vinyl window decals for the Gigi's Cupcakes tenant space, tax key number 813-9050.
I will take that one. I wasn't at the last meeting when this item was held, but my understanding was there was concern by the commission that any content on that vinyl would be unable to be deregulated by the city, and asked the staff to work with legal to find out exactly what authority we do have. After conferring with the city attorney, we have to, come to the conclusion that the city does not have the authority to regulate content on any sign. So if of opaque vinyl film would be approved as a sign, then we would have no control after that point. When it comes to content, they could put up, cupcakes, they could put up a 2-for-1 deal, they could put up a rainbow. It doesn't matter. We wouldn't have the ability on that. However, with that determination being made, we further discussed, okay, on Main Street, there is a lot of glass. And if you're going to have a restaurant or other uses that have back-of-house type operations that should be screened from public view, what can we do to approve something that they're requesting without making it a sign variance? And we discussed it at length and decided that the proper course of action would be going for site plan review, looking at architectural standards. In the DTS regulating plan, it states you have to have 40% clear glazing. Well, it's still glazing, it's just not going to be clear. So the Plan Commission does have the authority to change, or not waive, but change the percentages of glazing. And so really, in order to accommodate all the tenants, not just Gigi's, is that applicants should be coming before the Plan Commission asking for a change in materials of the exterior part of the tenant space. And so with that said, that leads to the next agenda item. So I kind of jumped ahead. But as for a sign appeal, we don't have the ability to regulate it if we do grant a variance allowing them to put the opaque film on. So hopefully that clears up some of the questions that we had at the last meeting. What do we do with a sign? Do we grant a sign variance or do we don't? Really what they're asking should be done through a site plan review and not a sign appeal.
So you're essentially suggesting to this body that we don't take action on the sign appeal?
You take action.
To deny it?
It would be to deny the variance. And then on the next agenda item is
Which is
site plan
5A.
review, which will discuss modifying the clear glazing requirement that's required for DTS and determining whether or not, where they're proposing to put the opaque glazing, make a recommendation to approve it, but be very specific of where it can be applied.
Okay, was the applicant made aware of this discussions that were held with staff and legal? Or are they just hearing it for the first time tonight?
They're probably hearing it for the very first time tonight.
Okay, they're nodding their heads. They're hearing it for the first time tonight. Commissioner Correll?
I guess just so we understand, so if we were to go that other route, it would allow us to put the glazing, but it would be on a specific site ongoing for the whole Drexel Town Square area? Is that what you're saying?
It'd be by tenant space.
Each time a tenant wanted to cover a back of house, they would go through the plan review for that specific site.
Correct. And then if say they move out and another tenant came in and
Yeah.
they wanted to relocate, they would have to come to Plan Commission for approval to put it on
Each
any other,
time.
every time.
Okay.
So they couldn't change that. We were concerned about what actually went up. So that whatever we would approve during that process would stay that way until they came back here.
Okay, so is there discussion on 4A other than,
4A, yeah.
okay, go ahead, Commissioner.
No, I just want to ask you, our concern was more, not so much with Gigi's, we were sure they were going to be okay, but it was the future if it got turned over to another business, that they didn't use that material, but they started using it to advertise, if you want to say. Would we still be in the same situation if we go to the next one?
Once they add content, now they're not changing the materials from clear glazing to opaque glazing. They're changing it from opaque glazing now to a sign. That they cannot do.
Okay, that's,
That's why we were going the direction of plan review, so that way we're dealing with materials and we're not dealing with signs and content.
okay.
Where under the sign appeal process, we're worried about content, not be able to regulate the content.
Okay.
All right, so I don't see a real reason to have a ton of discussion on 4A then, since we're going to be looking at the sort of compromise review on 5A. If there's any, unless there's any other comments, I would say we make a motion to deny the sign appeal for 4A.
Carl moves that the commission denies the request for a sign appeal at 7978 South Main Street.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call.
Dickman, aye.
Johnson, aye. Cabbage, aye.
Speedy, aye.
Kuzikowski, aye. Carl, aye.
Seifert, aye.
All right, so we move to new business, and item 5A is the item we just talked about. It's a plan review of building plans for modifications to the exterior building facade for Gigi's Cupcakes tenant space at 7978 South Main Street, tenant address 330 West Town Square Way, tax key number 813-9050. Pete.
Yep. As we discussed before, I kind of merged the two agenda explanations together. In your packet, there are exhibit, let me close out and get the other one up. Including your packets are Exhibit B and Exhibit C, which specifically point out the part of the building that they want to have glazed with that white opaque film. And so I'm not repeating myself with the discussion we just had before. We recommend that the Plan Commission approve the proposed building modification, changing the clear glazing to white opaque glazing for the windows illustrated in Exhibits B and C. And they have specific dimensions for each one. And so that way, if another tenant were to come in place, they wanted to change it, they would have to come before the Plan Commission because only those locations would be approved for the opaque glazing. And one of the reasons why we are approving this compared to an earlier request by Forward Dental is that in the DTS regulating plan, it talks about opaque glazing on Main Street or facing a street, where in this particular case, it faces a parking lot on both sides. So there's a little bit of difference, just in case someone brings up to you, well, why was one denied and the other okay? We would recommend against any opaque glazing on Main Street in any proposal, that they should really reconsider their configuration. So just would like to make sure I make that point of clarification that this is how Gigi's is a little bit different than an earlier proposal to have screening for their tenant space.
Okay. I'll open it up to Mr. Degner. If you're going to speak on this, you need a form. Comment form. Why don't you go fill one out, and I'll take some questions from the commission first. Any questions from our commission? Mr. Seibert.
Just a question, would that glazing be on the inside of the window or on the outside?
I believe the film is implied on the inside of the glass.
Applicant nods their head yes on the inside. Alderman Bekavich?
Really quickly, on the north elevation, I mean, obviously, it's, what do you call it, a back kitchen view? What did you call that?
Back of house operations.
Back of house operations. We're just gonna blank that off. Is there anything like, does this turn it into a sign to identify it as use other door? Because you're gonna have people walking up to the door. It's just gonna-
That would be a probably directional sign that we wouldn't necessarily wear, but if it's all opaque, I don't think someone would be walking into an unmarked door. It's not like there's a sign above that.
Well, there's a
necessarily.
GG's, is there a bayonet sign?
Yeah, that's over on the south side, in this
They didn't
picture.
get one on the
Close to
north?
the entrance.
No, the north underneath, the north entrance is underneath. If you look up on the screen, it's underneath the decking. And next to it'll be I think originally it was to be a police substation, or I'm not sure now it's going to be used for the tourism office space. I'm not sure, but either way.
Okay. That's it for me, otherwise.
Other questions from the commission?
I just want to say I'm glad we have some more control over it than what
Yeah, I mean, that was,
what's undersigned.
that's the reason we sent it back,
Yeah.
because that was a concern and a proper concern, given we would have lost total control over what happened to that in the future, because tenants do come and go. Yeah, that was my next question. One more question, then I'll go to you, Mr. Degner. So the applicant, you can come up if you want. Name and address for the record. Who feels like talking?
Christina Haas, address 330 West Town Square Way.
So you are comfortable with this compromise,
Yes,
your business, and that serves the needs of what you needed for that
yes, it does.
back of house space? Awesome. Any other questions? Alderman Guzekowski?
I think this is a good compromise, and I appreciate the differentiation between that and Main Street, Pete, because I was asked that actually by someone else, so I'm glad that you brought that up with the signage on the Main Street versus back of house, so for this.
Okay, if no other questions, a motion. Oh, Mr. Degner, I forgot about you. How could I forget?
Arden Degner, 8540 South Pennsylvania Avenue. This, to me, is a problem that we don't face in our society today. And that is these big expanses of glass that take the place of sturdy building materials. As far as I'm concerned, to have a building that's not going to be torn down in 20 years should have solid brick structures instead of thin glass. And I would suggest that you consider filling this in with a solid masonry instead of glass, which could be used for some industries, some businesses, but for this particular case, especially where it faces a parking lot, why not make it a solid structure?
Okay,
Thank
thanks
you.
for your comments. I'm going to disagree completely. I would argue that the structural integrity of buildings built now are way beyond what was built in the past. And ultimately, one of the reasons you go with glass is because, one, it does maintain structural integrity, but it also looks better, and it avoids vast expanses of concrete block or brick. So given that reality, and given that we asked Drexel Town Square to be a different kind of a building for Oak Creek, we have to look at how specifics of a business use of that space is going to, we have to think about those things. And this is one of the cases where, to the staff's credit and to the applicant's credit, they've figured out a compromise that works. I think this is a good compromise. Motion on 5A.
Crowell moves that the commission approve the proposed building modification, changing the clear glazing to white opaque glazing for the windows illustrated in exhibits B and C for 7978 South Main Street.
Dickman seconds.
Roll call.
Dickman, aye.
Johnston, aye. David, aye.
PDI.
Guzekowski.
Crowell, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Good luck. All right, moving on to 5B. It's the last item I'll introduce because I have to leave at 6:20. It's a conditions and condition and restrictions review for a conditional use permit request submitted by Arlene Butke, We Energies, and Jerry Frankie, Wispark, for a We Energies electric substation on a portion of the property at 10861 South Hall Avenue, tax key number 955-1014. Carried.
Thank you. As a reminder, at the December 13th Plan Commission meeting, the Plan Commission did recommend this particular use for council approval. And at tonight's meeting, what we want to do is talk about the proposed conditions and restrictions. So I'd like to walk you through those. First of all, the legal description, you'll notice, recognizes that the lot will be created by a future CSM. So there's the property description as it is currently configured, and then a little note saying that this will be a redivision. If you turn to page 2 of 8, section 3A, this recognizes that no employees will be located on site. If at such time parking areas are required, because there will be employees on site, this is saying that they will have to be provided in accordance with the existing planned unit development and the appropriate section of code. Under 3F, this recognizes that there's going to be access to the property from Howell Avenue, and that is under different jurisdiction, and any approvals would have to be copied to the city prior to obtaining local permits. Moving on to page 5 of 8, which is section 6K. This states that the Plan Commission may make any modification of standards in the above section by a 3/4 majority vote. Now, the reason that this is in here is for, number 1, clarity, number 2, for consistency, and number 3, recognizing that the proposed utility building will be made of metal and may not meet architectural standards due to the nature of the building itself. Continuing on that page to section 7, those are building and parking setbacks. This is recognizing that utility substations and towers must be located at least 50 feet from any lot line, and that's per code. Moving on to page 6 of 8, under 9, signs, just recognizing that signs on the property have to comply with code. Section 10, permitted uses, 1 electric power substation, and 1 addition is for a communications pole. That communications pole may or may not be needed. It would be a maximum of about 50 feet right now, and that is just for We Energies. It does not have anything to do with cellular communications or anything like that. Finally, the time of compliance, that is the standard of 12 months for commencement of the operation from the time of approval by the council. There is one more item to discuss. It's more just a point of information for the Plan Commission. This afternoon, I received an email from the county. They are an abutting property owner. There was a concern that there would be power infrastructure that may affect the parkland property. That information, the email was provided to the applicant for their information to coordinate with Milwaukee County. Staff is recommending that if there are any approvals or easements or anything that are necessary after those conversations, that they be provided to the city, as well as any access requirements. It's basically a standard requirement.
Was the applicants made aware of that request?
I forwarded the email this afternoon as soon as I received it.
Okay, the applicant's nodding yes.
So what the staff recommendation is that the Plan Commission recommends that the Common Council adopts the conditions and restrictions as part of the conditional use permit, allowing a We Energies substation, and I have to add here one communication pole on a portion of the property at 10861 South Howell Avenue after a public hearing. Mr. Mayor.
All right, I'm going to hand off the chair to Alderman Bukavich. Before I do that, though, I want to state that I am in support of item 5B as proposed. I think it's the proper use, and all of the restrictions and items listed, I think, are appropriate for that use. So I don't have any objections to it. At this time, I hand it off to Alderman Bukavich.
All right. At this time, I'll open it up to questions from the council. Wally?
Just Carrie, with this memo, that you received and everything, in order to get this cleared, do we have to put any kind of a condition in here to say that, we have to hear from the county, et cetera?
I don't think so. And the reason I say that is because it's really a county abutting property owner issue. If there are going to be easements or reviews necessary, those are going to be on a through the county by the applicant. We would just ask that it would be treated as access is on Howell Avenue. Any approvals, any easements, basically anything having to do with approvals, permits, or easements, copies of those be provided to the city prior to seeking any local permits.
Okay.
Before we go any further, it looks like the applicant's gonna make a statement. Maybe you can clear up some
Jerry
things.
Frankie, West Park. I would point out that once the parcel is created, it will no longer be adjacent to Milwaukee County Parkland. It'll be adjacent to our land. So if we were going through and doing the parcel ahead of time, then this wouldn't be an issue because it would not be an adjacent property.
Thank you. Other questions? Nobody? Okay. Again, an amenity that we do need, the mayor stated his support of it. So if there aren't any other questions, we'll look for a motion.
Mr. Dickman will make a motion that the Plan Commission recommends that the Common Council adopts the conditions and restrictions. And I want to stop here for a minute because you said, Carrie, to add in there about one pole. Where did you want to see it in the statement?
I can add it in for the council.
Okay, thank you. Now just continue. As part of the conditional use permit, allowing a We Energy substation on a portion of the property at 10861 South Howell Avenue after a public hearing.
Seifert seconds.
Roll call.
Dickman, aye.
Johnston, aye. Gavich, aye.
Guzekowski, aye.
Raleigh.
Seifert, aye.
All right. Moving right along, we're going to go to item 5C, conditional use permit requested by Chris McClure, Quick Trip, for a conditional use permit for an outdoor display, storage, and retail merchandise on the property at 2040 West Ryan Road. Carrie?
Thank you. The request is for outdoor storage and display of ice and propane retail merchandise, and that is shown on the materials that were provided to you. If I zoom in, it's actually on the south side of the existing building. And what I will point out is this particular plan does not include the landscaping, so some of this will be slightly masked from the street. To be consistent with other approvals in the city for similar uses, staff is recommending that the outdoor storage and display of retail merchandise be expressly limited to the ice and propane, as in the location identified on the submitted plan. No other retail merchandise will be allowed to be stored or displayed outside, and that includes underneath the fueling canopies, outside of the retail store, and it's not just limited to those particular areas. Like I said, the ice and the propane are the only things that we are recommending for approval in those particular locations. There is an error in the staff report, I apologize. It should say, should the Plan Commission consider the request for exterior storage and display of ice and propane, conditions and restrictions would be prepared for the next meeting. The staff recommendation is that the Plan Commission recommends that the Common Council approves a conditional use permit for outdoor storage and display of ice and propane retail merchandise on the property at 2040 West Ryan Road after a public hearing and subject to conditions and restrictions that will be prepared for the Commission's review at the next meeting, which is January 24th. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Carrie. At this time, I'll open it up to the commission for some questions. Jossie?
Is the applicant present? I have a question for you if you can come up to the podium.
If you could name and address, please, for the record.
Mark Clark, I'll use the address here, 2040 West Ryan Road.
So for outdoor storage, what items are you interested in storing besides the propane and ice?
That's all we're interested in going with. We may ask for a wood display, a firewood display at some point, like we have in our other locations, but that's what we're looking for.
Okay. So is the firewood also covered?
No, actually, staff talked to the applicant prior to their submission for this conditional use request, and we have not recommended that any other outdoor storage be allowed on any other gas station in the city. So we are limiting it to propane and ice. So we would not be recommending firewood, and that's not part of this application request.
And we'd be fine with that.
Thank you.
Fred, sorry. Mixed you guys up for a minute.
I also have a question for the applicant. The south side of your building, is that considered the best location for that rather than the west? Wouldn't you want to kind of bury this a little bit and not stick it out? I mean,
Well, the south side of the building is going to be the side facing Ryan Road. And there is going to be some landscaping that's going to be done, which it probably won't be seen from Ryan Road.
I'm just thinking those items aren't the best for,
Well, it's the least
enhancing-
visible from the guest coming
Yeah.
in because the way they approach the store, they come in from the north side.
Okay,
So it's the least visible that way. And it's just basically a storage where we take that ice and we move it inside to the store.
okay.
That it, Fred?
Yep.
Pat, anything?
No, I'll
No.
stay off
Chris?
this one.
Well, this falls in my district, and I truly don't have any opposition to this. I'm looking forward to welcoming them to the 6th District again. Second store.
Great. Dawn, anything? Brian? Wally?
Yeah, there's a gas station on the corner of 27th and College, and when we had the cold spell a couple weeks ago, they are allowed to put salt out there, bags of salt, and the problem I had was there were cars driving around, and they had the forklifts, driving all over, taking these big loads of salt to put them out there. Now, each one, is that right? Each gas station has its own requirements. Once it's approved, they can do what there's written, or what's going on.
No, there are some gas stations that may actually be doing this as part of their typical operations. They may not have city approval to do so. There are a couple of things. If the approval for the gas station did not specify in the conditional use permit, assuming there is one, that they could not do this, we've had some issues in the past of where we looked it up and it's completely silent. What we're saying from now forward in the conditional use is these are the specific things that can be displayed outside, and these are the specific locations that they can be displayed outside. The problem with displaying things underneath the fueling canopies and at the end of the fueling canopies is exactly what you're saying. There's also a concern for fire department for storing those things at the end of the canopies. That's why we're very specific now.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? I guess I'll put my 2 cents in. As far as the location goes, I'm absolutely fine with it. It's actually the side of the building. I mean, if this was any other building, that's where we'd be asking for it to go. Just so happens to front Ryan Road versus parking it out on the west side, which is technically the front. Again, there's the propane screened and locked. This isn't anything different than we require of anybody else, so I'm fully in support of it. So, nothing else? Motion.
Oh, there.
Guzikowski recommends to the Common Council to accept the Chris McGuire Quick Trip Incorp. Conditional use permit for exterior displays and storage.
Yes, the staff recommendation is that the Plan Commission recommends that the Common Council approves a conditional use permit for outdoor storage and display of ice and propane retail merchandise on the property at 2040 West Ryan Road after a public hearing and subject to conditions and restrictions that will be prepared for the Commission's review at the next meeting, which is January 24th, 2017.
Right here, I'm sorry. Thank
That
you.
sounds good.
Thank you, Karen.
That's okay. It's right after the holidays.
second
You
that.
got We're a little rusty,
You can
folks.
tell who's gonna make all the motions.
I'll second that.
Someone second.
So moved, and we
So
need a,
moved.
we need
Did we have a
We
second?
need a second.
Oh, we need a second.
Chandler second.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Roll call, please.
Dickman, aye.
Kavich, aye.
Guzikowski. Corell abstains as a neighboring business owner.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
Excellent. Approved. Good luck. Thank you. Going on, we're going to have a discussion on potential modifications to 27th Street Overlay District design and standards and allowed uses in the Regional Retail Overlay District. There'll be no action taken on this. This is just going to be a discussion. Boy, this takes me back a while. This goes back about 10 years. So, holy cow. I take it that's why you're here, Doug? Just, okay. I guess that's why Pete's here.
I'll take this one.
You guys are killing me up here. All right, you're up, Carrie.
All right, I don't have any graphics for you because this is just a discussion item. Suffice it to say that this affects pretty much all of 27th Street. As you may know, there are overlay districts that affect portions of 27th Street. Those were adopted as part of a 27th Street corridor plan. That was a joint effort with the city of Franklin that was done back in 2005. They established certain standards and criteria for those properties along 27th Street. So we're having a unified kind of development review in that corridor area. There are 4 specific districts and general overlay standards. The 4 districts are the RRO, UVO, NO, and OO. And if you don't know what those are, that's okay. Basically what they do is establish sort of overlay districts on top of the underlying districts. They have their own permitted accessory and conditional use allowances, as well as minimum requirements for setbacks, building height, those kinds of things. But everything on 27th Street in the overlay district has to abide by the general standards, and if they fall into this specific overlay district in one of these 4 subsections. So we have received several requests for development along 27th Street on a couple of parcels, which is fueling the discussion here tonight. They are within these overlay districts, and there are some challenges to these proposals being in these overlay districts. Some of them have to do with uses that are allowed in the overlay district or not the underlying zoning. So there's an inconsistency there. So that's one issue. There are some building and site standards that don't match what is being proposed. In other words, the overlay district standards are very, very specific and don't allow any kind of modifications to those standards. It doesn't grant the Plan Commission any ability to grant waivers to those standards or modifications or anything like that. They're very strict. They were intended to provide for a very certain, unique type of development along 27th Street. We have some options, though, with these overlay districts and possibly amending them if the Plan Commission is up to that. One is to amend the district allowed uses and standards. Another option would be to amend the district boundaries. Now, that would have some implications for each of the districts themselves. Or, and staff is not recommending this, removing the district boundaries in whole or in part. What staff is probably going to be bringing to the Plan Commission, if the Plan Commission indicates their willingness to move forward on this, is amending the standards themselves. We spoke initially with a couple of people from the city of Franklin. They have some language in their district standards that we don't have. They allow Plan Commission modifications with certain requirements. We'll get to that in a second. The other thing is allowing the use. Now, one of the particular uses that we're talking about is an institutional use, a religious use. Right now, where that proposal is, you may have heard, is in a district that is for business use, so it's a B district. The overlay district is also a retail district. So a church use has not been identified as one of the allowable uses in that overlay district. So even if we were to amend or rezone the underlying zoning for that particular parcel or parcels, the overlay district would prohibit the use in that district. So if the Plan Commission is amenable to amending the uses for the overlay district, we'd be looking at allowing that. That's one option for one particular instance. The other thing is the specific building and site standards. And we discussed whether or not to change things, specifically to change them throughout the whole district. The easiest thing and the thing that seemed to make the most sense was to try and align our standards more with Franklin's. And when comparing Franklin's standards to ours, there seems to be A lot that overlaps, but because of the way that Franklin's code is established, they have what's called a Unified Development Ordinance. It's different from how ours is specifically laid out. So my recommendation would be, and this is a very long discussion, I apologize. My recommendation would be to incorporate at least one of the sections that Franklin has. In your packets, if you turn to page 3-96 of the Franklin Code, subsection C2 includes waiver of standards. Now, this is for buildings that are non-residential buildings greater than 20,000 square feet, and we can talk about whether or not that would apply here to all buildings in our code, or if we wanted to restrict it. The Plan Commission may waive any of the following standards by a 3/4 vote of members in attendance, but only if supplemental design elements or improvements are incorporated into the project over and above those which are otherwise required, which compensate for the waiver of the particular standard. In support of the waiver request, the applicant shall detail such supplemental design elements in written and graphical form and provide an explanation as to the nature of standards for which the waiver is requested. This is similar to our modification language in our code right now, but again, it's specific to the overlay districts. I apologize that your packets don't incorporate our code. It was supposed to. There was a little bit of a mix-up whenever the packets were being prepared. So if you have any questions about what our code has as opposed to Franklin's, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. This is an initial discussion with the Plan Commission to gauge your opinions on the proposals for modifications, get your feedback about how we might present this moving forward. And while we're on that topic, the process moving forward may include a public meeting with Franklin, but it would certainly require a zoning text amendment process to move forward.
Okay. We will start it out for discussion. We'll open it up to the commission. Pat, you can go first.
I guess with my limited understanding of what you just all threw at us, based on the other development areas to the lakefront, Drexel Town Square and Oak Creek, to the no development district on 27th Street. I mean, the original plan when I started on here a lot of years ago was that was going to be our next big adventure. So I think that some modifications are needed to allow for that to happen.
Yeah. Paulie.
I didn't actually realize it was that long already since we started this design center. What you said, 2005?
2005 is when
Wow.
they were adopted, yeah.
Okay, and just looking at them, I don't know how it works out. On page 384, section 4, where it says exempting things, there it says allow the Plan Commission to waive any of the 27 standards by 5 votes of all the members of the Plan Commission, whereas under the one you just stated on 396, there it's the way we do it here, which is 3/4 of the members in attendance.
Right.
I would like to see something standardized,
Well, and that's where the Franklin Code kind of differs, because they have this modification in their general standards, and then they had another modification under the buildings 20,000 square feet and above. My recommendation, again, would be exactly what you're saying, have one modification standard language for basically any of the modifications that we would be including.
Jocelyn?
What's the difference between option 1 and 2?
Option 1 is where I believe we should be going. We should be looking at allowing another use to be added into the permitted or conditional use category for these districts. And then amending the standards is like incorporating the Franklin language into ours. Amending the district boundaries is a little bit tricky, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing it, because then we get into considerations of where does that district boundary end? Where does it begin? Which properties do we say, okay, these make sense to be within the boundary as opposed to not? We've already made those distinctions. Those overlay districts have been established since 2005. So my recommendation would be don't amend the boundary, amend the regulations.
Okay, and then my next question is, so what questions have come about that brought up this actual discussion?
One is use. There have been a couple of uses that have been proposed that may actually fit in, but are prohibited or not allowed in the overlay district. And then the standards. We don't have any allowance for the Plan Commission to say, you can use something other than brick or stone. It doesn't recognize that there are other architectural materials that have been allowed elsewhere in the city that are actually up to what we are looking for in terms of quality, in terms of durability. It doesn't recognize metal at all as being an allowed material. So basically, you'd be looking at all buildings, brick, stone, or glass. A combination of those three materials and nothing else.
So how is this different than the potential applicants coming up for a variance versus actually making changes?
A variance goes before the Board of Zoning Appeals, and there's 5 variance criteria that's based on hardship. So we wouldn't be looking at a variance. We'd be looking at a modification. But unfortunately, the overlay district doesn't allow the Plan Commission to make a modification to those standards, which is why I'm suggesting that perhaps we incorporate Franklin's language or some variant thereof to make our code more in line with what Franklin already does.
Thank you.
That again?
Yeah, so the bottom line is option 1, which I think that I am in favor of, allows us to have some modifications and let us decide, whereas right now there's really no options for these other uses.
Right, and when we get into uses, that's going to be a discussion that's probably on a case-by-case basis, perhaps. We know of one, and that is a church that wants to be located on 27th Street. That's one of the reasons why the use is being brought up at this time. Whether or not the Plan Commission feels that it should be allowed in the whole overlay district as just a blanket, churches are allowed, or what have you, that's a discussion that we can continue to have, but that's one of the reasons that this is brought forward. And then, of course, we've had some other discussion items on building materials, for instance, with the proposed car dealership. Part of their conditional use permit was you have to abide by the standards. Again, that would say that they would have to have a brick, stone, and glass building. Does that really make sense? Can we allow for some architectural modifications and still meet the intent and the spirit of the 27th Street overlay district? Does it have to be 75%? Can we go down to 60%? I mean, it would allow the Plan Commission to have these conversations with the applicant, trying to get the best of architecture, trying to meet what we intended for 27th Street, but also allowing some flexibility to allow the applicant some room to, meet their standards too.
I'd rather swing it on a case-by-case basis. I'd be in favor of that.
It seems like you've
Chris?
identified, there's been applicants that have stepped forward, whether it's 1 or 3 or others, but whatever it's been, it's brought to light, this whole district. And to me, if we have an opportunity here that we could take another look at it for better opportunity, overall use, or however it's going to be, I agree. I think we should look at number 1 as well and look at what's out there.
Ollie again?
Carrie, you were talking about that at some point we should really, or not we maybe, but the city would sit down with Franklin. And would you review the proposals you're talking about, or are they over there looking at something also, and they would bring something to the table?
Well, we had an initial discussion with 2 representatives from the city of Franklin, senior planner and I believe the economic development director. And in discussions with them, we kind of got an idea of how they were applying the 27th Street overlay district standards. Now, number 1, they just have 1 district. We have 4 plus the general overlay district. So they handle theirs a little bit differently. They've also amended their district. But again, their overlay district standards have this modification in it too. So we were getting some information about how we could then bring ours more in line with theirs, kind of addressing some of these issues, and then also seeing how they went through the process to change what they had. So I think that a continuing conversation with them, and they were receptive to what we were saying. I think at the end of the meeting, we both kind of came to the conclusion that, well, maybe we should just amend ours to be more in line with yours. That seems to make the most sense. That way we're doing the same thing. But again, they didn't seem to have any real consternation with what we were proposing. We did mention specifically that the request was for, one of the requests that we had received was for a church. and they didn't really have much of an opinion one way or the other about including churches in the overlay district.
I was kind of surprised because I thought both of our communities were much closer together when this whole thing was developed back in 2005. Were you on the committee?
Yeah, actually, I caught the tail end of it, yes, and I was on it. And again, it was a different time, it was a different place. And I'm talking like a real old timer here, but you know, we went through the recession and the whole deal, and we really did think it was going to develop quickly, and we wanted some standardized things across the board. And we are two different communities, and we develop very differently, and we have different needs and different wants. So I think it would be healthy to get back and make sure we're on the same standards and still going in the same direction.
Well, and again, it's a little bit different. I mean, both communities adopted the general 27th Street corridor plan, and everybody is still moving forward with that. It's just the regulations that we adopted in compliance with that plan are a little bit different. And again, Franklin has a unified development ordinance, and I know that probably is not familiar to most of you, but basically it takes their standards and puts them all in one. So they don't have necessarily standards under each district like we do. It's kind of all encompassing, which is, again, another reason why it's a little bit difficult for us to just say, we're going to take all of Franklin's standards and just adopt them. Well, it doesn't work, but certain portions would be able to be incorporated relatively easily.
Just with the whole IKEA development, and that's going to go through and shoot up to 27th Street at some point in time, I'm guessing that
The road will.
Which leads to some development in that area. I guess
Yes.
I'd rather be on the ability to be flexible when you get Franklin on the other side that has that ability versus us eliminating an option. At least let's be able to take a look at it.
Point two.
Anyone else? So, again, I guess from my point of view, the plan was laid out. We are a little more complicated. We do have different districts. Nobody could foresee some of the uses coming, particularly when existing businesses sit within that overlay and then change. That's what I suspect helped bring this to light and drive it. What's really been a constant for Oak Creek and really an advantage for us is we've been flexible enough to be able to change and adapt. It's rather business friendly. And I think it's been successful in the past for us, and it can be in the future. So I do think our planning staff is going down the right path and has the right suggestions. I totally don't believe in removing the district boundaries. It just doesn't make sense, or to amend them. I don't want to call it spot zoning, but you're kind of getting into that one time, let's cut a piece of pie out to make it fit. I want to see us having the most leeway to be able to make changes as needed, as Pat said, on a case-by-case basis. I think we can make the best decisions going that way, because nobody has a crystal ball and nobody can see what's coming down the pipe on that. We can talk about all sorts of development, but as it comes and new things happen, there's no way to foresee what somebody may want to build going forward. So, it could be anything from what you imagine, from a church to a hotel to who knows.
Car dealership.
It could be a car dealership. I mean, those are three very different uses, and you have to be flexible to accommodate all as best you can. So, it's only a discussion, but I really do believe our planning staff's on the right path. I would encourage them to go down there with the option one, as it's so called, about allowing uses and standards that way for us. So,
Okay.
anybody see any different?
Oh, I agree with you. The only question I have, will there be possibly some follow-up meetings with Franklin doing the 27th Street corridor? We used to have meetings with him at one time.
We did, and it kind of cooled off. The economy kind of did that. And Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, or Pete, Carrie, we were kind of waiting on the road, really. Now that the road's kind of completed, I think you're going to start to see things go there. Nobody was going to move in there with that road in that condition. So, Doug?
Doug Seymour, Director of Community Development. You're right, Dan. Well, the road has been taking quite some time, quite a bit longer than we had anticipated to be completed. It's just recently opened, and it's not even totally complete right now. They'll finish up next spring on some of the streetscape elements that were part of the 27th Street corridor plan. So, I mean, it really was, there was a contributing factor towards the lack of activity, if you will, along the corridor. Not the only one, of course. I mean, the economics certainly have been changed over the last decade, and there have been opportunities that were more fruitful for the city to really focus on elsewhere. So getting back to 27th Street is a good idea. I think there's still a load of potential there. And we still do have a really unique opportunity to shape that corridor and using many of the same concepts that we had in the corridor plan and the streetscape plan and working with the city of Franklin. I guess one of the silver lining, if you will, of the economic factors that kind of slowed development there is it allowed us to really kind of hold those properties back until the market was ready for them. So that now that we have some catalytic developments like Drexel Town Square, like IKEA, and like Northwestern Mutual, and like Wheaton on the Franklin side, and we have the ability to move forward again with maintaining those high standards. Are they the same as they were back in 2005? No. I think that, I mean, a lot of things that we were looking at in 2005 were probably very well thought out, but probably might have been ignoring some market realities for the region, particularly in terms of the amount of office space that we thought would be along that corridor. So I think we'll be sensitive to uses, we'll be sensitive to standards. I would hope that you would be sensitive to standards as well, and not merely because a particular developer says, well, I really can't do that, I don't want to do that. But in keeping with the spirit of the regulation where, okay, well, let's find another way to enhance your project to make up for that part that you can't do. So, I mean, if you can't do 75% brick, what else are you going to do over and above the standards? So I think that offers the development community, as well as the planning commission, the opportunity to really maximize the value of the development along 27th Street and maintain the type of visual appeal and the value that we're looking for there. And I think Carrie's right. I think we're going down the right track with the ability to be flexible. But I think it's, it was 11 years ago, and things certainly changed, but I think we've got an opportunity to really realize the potential of that corridor right now.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? I guess before we go, I just want to thank the planning commission, or the planning department, for putting this together, because to get that explanation of what all went into the 27th Street plan and drill it down to something we could understand and basically put it in layman's terms, because believe me, that plan is about so thick. To bring it into perspective here was really something, and to give us the options as clearly as they did, at least to direct a discussion. A lot of work went into that. It's not easy.
Carrie did a great job.
Very good job, everyone. So,
I
okay.
have one more thing to discuss, and that is whether or not the Plan Commission would like to take up an offer to tour an IBEW location. It's their training facility. Doesn't look like that letter made it into the packet, so I'm trying to bring it up here so that we can talk about that. Essentially,
Can I help you with this one, Carrie?
you got it?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. The IBEW, for those that don't know, is the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. What they do is they train electricians and they run their apprenticeship classes. They're located out in Wauwatosa on 110th and Watertown Plank Road, roughly. They have a training facility, and they put their apprentices through it. They've been reaching out to all municipalities, school boards, planning commissions, so they have a better understanding as to when they're okaying projects, whether buildings, roads, you name it, what goes into the training, and to make sure when you're approving your things, you're getting the most bang for your buck when it comes to the workers in the area. And they also want you to know that no taxpayer money goes into this. It's all self-funded. This is true of all the training centers. The IBEW isn't unique. There's 18 different crafts. They all have their own training. So if somebody ventures in and decides to become a tradesman, that training basically through their programs is cost-free to the public. So these are things that if their work doesn't continue, it's funded by the actual people that perform the work. So if the actual people start to work less money goes into the training schools, that falls to the person to fund it themselves or taxpayers to fund it through private agencies such as WCTC or a tech school or something like that. So if you haven't been there, it's really worthwhile to see how in depth they train these people. Everything from basic wiring to fire alarms to solar to high voltage switchgear. We just approved a substation. You get a better understanding of what you're doing. And if you're so inclined, it would probably take a half an hour of your time, set it up after work. They could take you through. They perform classroom work there as well as hands-on. It'd be time well spent. That'd be my opinion. But the floor is yours now.
Well, as Dan said, we received an offer for the Plan Commission to tour the facility. So if the Plan Commission wants to tour the facility as a commission, we would have to warn it as a special meeting. If you wanted to do, as Dan suggested, individual tours, just let me know. I can provide you with that information, but just passing along the information.
For the most part, they take you as a group. But again, if we're going to go as a group, then we got a quorum. So we have to be aware of that. But if you'd like to do it, again, they bring everybody in from the governor to senators, assembly people, right on down to planning commission, because they want people aware of what's going in and what's being provided out there. Painters, drywallers, they do the same thing. Plumbers, the whole deal, and you really start to get an understanding of what's really going in to create a building such as this.
I did get a letter at home about this. I was going to actually already reach out to them for a tour. I do work out in Butler for my day job. So I was thinking I would reach out individually, but if you want to do it as a group, I can certainly do that.
I think as long as Wally and Fred can fit it in their after-work schedule, I think we should.
Hard while he's on travel detail.
No, after my vacation schedule, remember.
And
You know,
again,
we don't get any vacation time, guys.
So I just wanted to bring it to your attention. We can certainly, discuss this and warn a special meeting if it's necessary. But anyway.
But again, many of the people that worked in not only Drexel Town Square, but downtown Milwaukee, power plant, things like that, they were trained out there. So it's kind of neat, and again, may open your eyes. It may be an opportunity for a son, a neighbor, or a grandson as you go through there to find out how to get involved with this if you want to pursue it. So. Or daughter. Yes, and you know what? That's another thing. Dawn brings up a great point. The trades are open to women, very open to women. I want to say like 15% of all tradesmen these days are female. So it's a very wide open craft for both male and female alike. And you'd be surprised at what the demand's going to be over 10 years across the board on trades. In some cases, it will be up to 50% in some areas that they're going to need workmen. So, could be very advantageous for some young people for a career. That it? Yeah, we can go around you, Wally. You're special. We can do that. If that is it on discussion, we can look for adjournment.
Carrillo moves to adjourn at 6:58.
Carl seconds. Roll call.
Dickman, aye.
Dunstan, aye.
Carrillo, aye.
Kavich, aye.
Kuzikowski, aye.
Burrell, aye.
Seifert, aye.
Chandler, aye.
All right. Thank you for joining us. The mayor did not make it back quite on time. We will notify him that the meeting has ended. Again, enjoy your week and try to stay warm and dry. Thank you.